Most people think monopolies are a modern invention corporations buying out competitors. Tech giants crushing startups, cartels fixing prices in shadowy boardrooms. In 1362, a shoemaker named John Russell tried to sell boots in London for 2 pence, less than the going rate. The Cordwainers Guild didn't sue him. They didn't report him to authorities. They broke into his workshop at night, destroyed his tools, burned his leather, and warned every tanner in the city that anyone selling to Russell would face the same treatment. Russell never made another shoe. The guild didn't just control the shoe market. They controlled who was allowed to have a livelihood. This wasn't crime. This was law. And the system that made it legal shaped capitalism more than any king or philosopher ever did. Welcome to Economic Historian, where money reveals what history hides. Medieval guilds weren't trade associations. They weren't networking groups for craftsmen. They were economic enforcement cartels with the legal power to decide who could work, what they could charge, how much they could produce, and whether their children would eat. For over 400 years, they controlled urban economies across Europe with a precision that would make modern regulators blush. And they did it by answering one question that still governs markets today: who gets to compete? Here's what makes guilds fascinating. They weren't imposed by kings or churches. They were created by craftsmen themselves, bakers, weavers, smiths, carpenters, ordinary workers who built the most sophisticated price-fixing apparatus in history, then convinced everyone it was for the common good. By 1300, you couldn't legally bake bread in Paris, weave cloth in Florence, or forge iron in Cologne without guild membership. And membership wasn't something you bought. It was something you earned through 7 years of unpaid labor. A masterpiece examination that existing members could fail you on for any reason, and an entry fee that averaged 6 months of a master craftsman's income. The barrier to entry wasn't designed to ensure quality. It was designed to restrict supply. To understand how guilds controlled entire economies, you have to understand what they actually regulated. Start with prices. Every guild maintained a fixed price schedule for their goods. In 1350, the London Bakers' Guild set the price of a penny loaf at exactly £1 when wheat cost 6 shillings per quarter. When wheat prices dropped, the loaf got bigger. When wheat prices rose, the loaf got smaller. But the price never changed. This wasn't about fairness. It was about predictability. If customers knew exactly what they'd pay, they stopped shopping around. And if they stopped shopping around, they stopped creating competition. But price fixing only works if you control supply. That's where the real mechanism operated. Guilds didn't just set prices, they determined how many people could produce goods at those prices. In Cologne, the Weavers' Guild capped membership at 180 masters. Not because there were only 180 qualified weavers in a city of 40,000 people. Because 180 weavers produced exactly enough cloth to meet demand at the fixed price without creating a surplus that would pressure prices downward. Every guild calculated this equilibrium obsessively. Too many producers meant falling prices. Too few meant customers buying from outsiders. The sweet spot was artificial scarcity, just enough competition to look legitimate, just little enough to maintain margins. They enforced this through apprenticeship, which is where the system gets genuinely dark. A boy, and it was almost always boys, would enter apprenticeship around age 12. For 7 years, he worked without wages, not low wages, 0 wages. He received room, board, and training, but no money. After 7 years, he became a journeyman, a qualified craftsman who could work for wages but couldn't own a workshop, sell directly to customers, or train apprentices. To become a master, he had to produce a masterpiece for examination by existing guild masters, who judged it in closed sessions without written standards. If you were the son of a master, your masterpiece was usually approved. If you weren't, the rejection rate hovered around 60%. Here's the economics. By forcing 7 years of unpaid labor, guilds extracted enormous value from apprentices. A trained apprentice in year 6 or 7 produced work nearly as good as a master, but cost only food and shelter. Masters didn't compete for apprentices by offering wages. They competed by offering the promise of eventual membership. And because membership was controlled, that promise was often a lie. Many journeymen worked for wages their entire lives, never achieving master status, never owning their own business, always dependent on the masters who controlled access. The scale of this extraction is staggering. In 15th century Nuremberg, the Metalworkers Guild had 120 masters, employing roughly 800 apprentices and journeymen. Those 800 workers produced the majority of the city's metal goods but owned none of the workshops, none of the tools, and had no legal right to sell directly to customers. The 120 masters didn't just earn more, they controlled the entire value chain from raw materials to retail while paying most of their workforce nothing. Guilds didn't just restrict who could produce, they restricted how you could produce. In 1355, the Flemish Weavers' Guild banned a new loom design that allowed one weaver to produce cloth 40% faster. Not because the cloth was lower quality, was identical. Because if one weaver could produce 40% more, you'd need 40% fewer weavers to meet demand. The guild destroyed the looms and expelled the weavers who'd used them. Innovation wasn't rewarded. It was punished. Because innovation disrupted the supply control that made the entire system work. Even the quality standards guilds claimed to enforce were really market access controls. Yes, guilds inspected goods and punished shoddy work, but they also banned techniques that would have made goods cheaper or more accessible. The London Goldsmiths Guild prohibited mixing gold with cheaper metals, but they also prohibited designs that used less gold. A lighter, more affordable gold ring violated guild standards not because it was fraudulent, but because it expanded the potential customer base beyond wealthy elites. Keeping gold expensive kept demand manageable and margins high. Nothing says protecting consumers quite like banning affordability. The enforcement mechanism was total. Guilds had legal authority to search workshops, confiscate goods, levy fines, and bar violators from trade. In most cities, they also controlled who could sell in markets. If you weren't a guild member, you couldn't rent a stall, hire a cart, or even stand on a street corner with goods for sale. Merchants who bought from non-guild producers faced fines or expulsion from the merchant guild. Customers who commissioned work from non-guild craftsmen could have the finished goods confiscated. The system was airtight. It's produced without permission, and your tools get destroyed. Buy from outsiders, and you lose your trading rights. Try to undercut prices, and the entire guild shuts you down. It wasn't just economic control. It was economic totalitarianism enforced by the workers themselves. But here's what people miss. This wasn't kings imposing control on helpless craftsmen. Craftsmen built this system and defended it viciously because it solved a real problem. Medieval markets were brutal. A bad harvest, a plague outbreak, or a war could destroy demand overnight. Prices fluctuated wildly. One year, you'd have too many customers. The next year, you'd have none. For a craftsman with a family to feed, this volatility was existential. Guilds offered stability, fix prices, restrict supply, control competition, and you eliminate volatility. You know what you'll earn. You know who your competitors are. You know your son will inherit your position. The cost was innovation, efficiency, and opportunity for outsiders. But for guild members, that was a bargain. They weren't evil. They were humans responding rationally to incentives. Restrict access, reduce uncertainty, secure your family's future. The problem was that your family didn't include everyone else's family. By 1450, European cities had multi-generational journeymen whose fathers and grandfathers had also worked for wages without ever achieving master status. Entire families locked out of ownership, locked out of entrepreneurship, locked out of advancement. Because the people who'd gotten in first had pulled the ladder up behind them. The wealth gap this created was structural. Guild masters owned property, trained cheap labor, controlled prices, and passed their positions to their sons. Journeymen owned nothing, earned fixed wages, and had no path to ownership. This wasn't temporary inequality that hard work could overcome. It was a caste system disguised as meritocracy. And when outsiders tried to break in, guilds didn't just resist, they rioted. In 1381, Flemish weavers massacred non-guild clothworkers in Ghent, killing over 200 people. In 1419, Parisian butchers attacked unlicensed meat sellers, leaving dozens dead. Violence wasn't an aberration, it was enforcement. When legal mechanisms failed to keep outsiders out, physical force finished the job. Guilds claimed they protected quality, prevented fraud, and maintained standards. What they actually protected was market share. What they prevented was competition. What they maintained was artificial scarcity that benefited insiders at everyone else's expense. And that brings us to today, because this isn't a medieval curiosity. It's a blueprint still in operation. Strip away the guild terminology, and you're left with occupational licensing, and it operates on identical logic. In the United States, roughly 30% of workers need government permission to do their jobs more than 5 times the rate in the 1950s. Barbers need 1,500 hours of training. Interior designers need certification in 3 states. Florists need licensing in Louisiana. These aren't safety requirements, they're supply restrictions. The mechanism is the same. Limit who can enter a profession, and you limit competition. Less competition means higher wages for existing workers and higher prices for customers. A 2017 study found that licensing raises wages for licensed workers by 18%. On average, not because they're more skilled, but because there are fewer of them. Meanwhile, aspiring workers face barriers that have nothing to do with competence. You can't braid hair for money in Iowa without 2,100 hours of training. More than double what's required to become an EMT. The training doesn't make you better at braiding hair. It makes it harder to become a hair braider. Fewer hair braiders means the ones with licenses charge more. Professional associations, medical boards, trade unions don't just set standards. They control supply. The American Medical Association has lobbied for decades to restrict the number of medical residency positions. Not because there are too many qualified doctors, but because more doctors would mean more competition and lower physician incomes. Meanwhile, patients wait months for appointments and pay prices that would make medieval guildmasters jealous. When Uber and Lyft launched, they didn't face opposition primarily from concerned customers. They faced it from taxi medallion oneza, literal guild structure where cities limit the number of legal taxis. In New York, medallion prices exceeded $1 million before ride-sharing arrived. The medallion wasn't proof of skill. It was proof you'd gotten in before the door closed. And when someone found a way around the door, medallion owners demanded the government shut it down. Or consider housing, where zoning laws function as guild membership restrictions. In San Francisco, you can't legally build new housing on 80% of the city's residential land. Not because of engineering constraints, because existing homeowners vote to restrict supply, which raises their property values while pricing out renters and new buyers. This isn't free market capitalism. It's guild economics control access, restrict supply, benefit insiders. Even innovation faces the same bans guilds imposed. When Tesla tried to sell cars directly to consumers, dealership associations, modern guilds lobbied states to make it illegal, arguing that the dealer franchise system protects consumers, just like the Flemish weavers protected consumers by burning the faster looms. The logic is identical. Ban the innovation that threatens incumbent profits, then claim you're protecting quality. The vocabulary changed. The mechanism didn't. You still need permission to compete. That permission is still controlled by people already in the market. And the justification is still quality or safety when the actual goal is limiting competition. Medieval guilds reveal that markets don't naturally tend toward competition. They tend toward control. Whoever gets access first has every incentive to restrict access for everyone else. And they'll construct elaborate justifications: quality, safety, tradition, professionalism to make that restriction sound legitimate. Power doesn't come from producing the best goods. It comes from deciding who's allowed to produce goods at all. Modern systems haven't eliminated this. They've made it invisible through complexity. We don't call them guilds anymore. We call them licensing boards, professional associations, zoning committees, regulatory agencies. But the incentive structure is identical. Insiders restricting supply to benefit insiders, using the language of protection to justify exclusion. Understanding this doesn't require cynicism. It requires recognizing that people protecting their own interests isn't evil, it's predictable. The medieval baker who supported guild restrictions wasn't a villain. He was trying to feed his family in an uncertain world. The modern professional who supports licensing isn't necessarily corrupt. They genuinely believe standards matter, but the effect is the same. Barriers that protect incumbents, restrict newcomers, and raise prices for everyone else. History doesn't repeat, but the incentives do. And once you see the incentives, the outcomes stop being surprising. If this opened your eyes, subscribe now. The economy has a memory, and I'll help you understand it.